She didn't run to him. She chose him. Stood in the rain outside the most dangerous address in the city, dress soaked through, one wrist wrapped in a silk scarf that didn't quite cover the bruise underneath, and she knocked. Not frantically, not desperately. 3 quiet, deliberate knocks. The kind you make when you've already decided. The man on the other side of that door was Lorenzo De Luca. The ghost, the monster, the name her husband kept locked behind his teeth, like something that could cut him on the way out. And when De Luca opened that door and looked at her, this woman from the enemy household, standing in the rain at 11 at night with nothing but a phone in her hand and something cold and certain in her eyes, he didn't reach for a weapon. He stepped aside, let her in. Now here's what I need you to understand before I tell you what happened in that apartment, and what happened in the weeks that followed, and what it cost both of them before it was over. Amelia Moretti did not go to Lorenzo De Luca because she was desperate. She went to him because she had spent 18 months inside her husband's empire, learning every secret he thought she was too quiet to notice. And she had found one secret that didn't belong to her husband. It belonged to De Luca, and she had carried it to his door like a loaded weapon. The question is, which direction was she planning to fire it? Stay with me. You need to hear how this started. Amelia Caruso became Amelia Moretti on a Tuesday in September, not a Saturday, not a ceremony with flowers and witnesses who knew her name. A courthouse, a registrar, 2 signatures, and a debt her father could never have repaid any other way. The Moretti family had been collecting on that debt for 2 years before Marco finally came to her father with the alternative. Marco was 34, controlled, well-dressed in the particular way that communicated power without announcing it. He looked at Amelia across her father's kitchen table, like she was a problem he had already solved. She looked back at him and said, I want 2 things. My father's debt erased completely, not reduced, erased, and I keep my own accounts. Marco blinked. Just once, he agreed to both. He thought the accounts were a small concession. He would later understand they were the entire game. For 8 months, Amelia moved through the Moretti estate, like a woman who had accepted her circumstances. She was present at dinners. She was gracious to his associates. She was, by every visible measure, exactly what he needed her to be. But she was an architect before she was a wife. Architects don't just look at what's in front of them. They look at what's underneath. The load-bearing structures. The systems that keep the surface standing. Marco needed someone to manage the accounts his official accountant couldn't see. Shell companies, offshore transfers, the financial tributaries of a criminal organization that looked on paper like a series of construction firms. He gave this work to Amelia because she was smart and trusted, and, most importantly, completely controlled by the circumstances of her own marriage. So he thought. She learned everything. Not because she was planning something, not at first, but because she was meticulous and because understanding systems was the only language she'd ever been fluent in. Here's where I need you to pay close attention, because what she found is the thing that set everything in motion. And once you hear it, you'll understand why going to Marco's worst enemy wasn't madness. It was the only logical move on the board. The affair, she found the way women always find these things, not through snooping, but through a detail that had the wrong shape. A hotel key and a coat she hadn't seen him wear in months. The name in a message that was open for 3 seconds before the screen locked. An absence that felt different from all the other absences. She didn't confront him. She put it away inside herself like a document she wasn't ready to file yet. And she kept working. Kept reading, kept finding the shape of things, until she found the transaction. A single wire transfer, buried under 4 layers of account numbers and 3 years of deliberately confusing notation. Marco's own handwriting on the original authorization. She recognized it because she'd seen hundreds of pages of it by then. The recipient, a man who, when she searched the name, had no digital footprint, no registered business, no public existence. The memo line read, DeLuca, final, the date, 7 years ago. Amelia sat very still for a long time. She didn't know what DeLuca, final, meant yet, but she knew Lorenzo DeLuca, knew his reputation, knew that he and Marco shared a hatred that ran deeper than business rivalry. She knew that people who share that kind of hatred almost always share a wound first. She started digging. What she found, what took her 3 more weeks of careful, quiet work to confirm, was that DeLuca, final, was the last payment in a series, and the series was labeled Accident Coordination. The target, one woman, Sofia DeLuca, Lorenzo DeLuca's wife. Amelia closed her laptop, sat in the silence of the estate, thought about a woman named Sofia who had been erased so cleanly that the man who loved her had spent 7 years unable to prove it. Then she thought about her own accounts, her own careful records, her own 18 months of learning how to be invisible inside someone else's empire. She picked up her coat. She walked into the rain. DeLuca's building had no visible security. That was the security. He opened the door himself. No guard, no announcement, as if he'd been watching her approach from the moment she stepped out of the car. He was in a dark shirt, no jacket, no performance. Just a man in his own space looking at something he hadn't expected. Moretti's wife, he said. Moretti's wife is currently inside the Moretti estate, she said. I don't know who I am right now. That's actually part of why I'm here. A pause. Brief. He stepped back. Let her in. His apartment was nothing like what she'd been prepared for. No trophies of power, no statement furniture. A lamp, a chair. Books stacked in no particular order on a low shelf. A half-empty glass on the side table, amber liquid. No ice, the only sign that a human being had been sitting alone in this room before she knocked. She handed him her phone. The photograph of the transaction, the memo line. She watched his face. There's a specific kind of stillness that settles over a person when they receive proof of something they already knew but could never hold in their hands. It doesn't look like shock. It doesn't look like grief. It looks like a room after the last thing holding the ceiling up has been quietly removed. DeLuca went very still. Then he set the phone down on the table, slowly, like something that might be explosive. Sofia, he said, not a question, not to Amelia, to himself or to the air or to something she couldn't see. She waited. He looked up. How long have you had this? 3 weeks. You verified it yourself? I verified it myself, and you came here. His voice had no temperature. With evidence that could start a war. I told you, she said. I don't know who I am right now, but I know who he is, and I know what he did. She held his gaze. I also know you've been trying to prove this for 7 years and couldn't, because the accounts were managed by someone he trusted completely. A beat. He trusted me completely. The room was very quiet. What do you want? DeLuca asked. I want what you want, she said. I want him to lose everything he thinks is untouchable. I want the people who covered for him to understand what they covered for. She paused. And I want out. Completely. New name, new city, new life. I want to vanish so thoroughly that he never has reason to come looking. DeLuca studied her for a long moment. Not the way men usually studied her, calculating appearance, assessing use. He was reading something else, something underneath. You're not just angry, he said. No, this isn't about the affair. The word affair landed between them like something small and insufficient for what it was supposed to describe. The affair is what made me stop being careful, she said. What I found in the accounts is what made me start. You think you know what kind of man Lorenzo De Luca is. You've heard the reputation. You've pictured the type. I need you to hold on, because the next 10 minutes are going to take everything you think you know and quietly turn it inside out. He made coffee. That was the thing she'd remember later when she was trying to explain it to herself. Not the terms, not the strategy, not the moment he confirmed he would help her. The fact that he made coffee, 2 cups, put one in front of her without asking. The same quiet, automatic hospitality you'd offer someone who'd been standing in the rain. He sat across from her at the table, not close, not performing distance either, just present. Sophia was 29, he said. He wasn't looking at Amelia. He was looking at the table. We'd been married 4 years. I was building the operation. She was the thing I was building it around. The reason the whole thing was supposed to be worth it eventually. He stopped. Amelia didn't fill the silence. The night of the accident, he said. I was in a meeting with Marco. Arranged last minute. Held twice as long as it needed to be. He looked up. I have thought about that meeting every day for 7 years, Amelia understood. Marco had put De Luca in a room so he couldn't be where Sophia was. She looked at her coffee. My father's debt, she said quietly. Marco didn't collect it. He created it. I didn't know that until recently. She turned the cup in her hands. I thought I was making a sacrifice to save my family. I was actually being moved into position. Something shifted in De Luca's expression. Not softness. He wasn't built for easy softness, but a recognition. The specific recognition of someone who has lived inside a story that turned out to have a different author than they thought. Then we have more in common than I expected, he said. Yes, she said. Neither of them said anything else about it. They didn't need to. The terms came next. Surgical, specific. She would return to the estate, maintain appearances, and funnel him information. Routes, timelines, financial patterns. He would position his network to dismantle Marco's operation from the outside in. When the moment came, she would get protection, resources, and a clean exit, whatever form she needed it to take. She agreed. She should have asked one more question before she did. She didn't. She went back, walked into the Moretti estate at 2 a.m, hung up her coat, went upstairs, and lay in the bed beside her sleeping husband with her eyes open and her mind running calculations. The next morning, she made breakfast, smiled at the right moments, moved through the house like a woman with nothing on her mind. Inside, she was building a second architecture, invisible, load-bearing, designed to bring the whole thing down from underneath. Every night, through an encrypted channel De Luca had set up, she transmitted what she'd learned. Supply logistics, meeting schedules, the names of the men Marco trusted most. Every night, a single reply came back. Received. 2 letters. A period. The smallest possible evidence that someone on the other end was there. She told herself it was enough because it was professional, clean, appropriate. She was lying to herself, but she was very good at it. The first crack appeared 3 weeks in. Her cousin Aldo, low-level, loyal, and annoyingly perceptive, came to find her in the garden. Sat down beside her like a man who wasn't sure what he was about to say. Someone's been feeding information out of this house, he said. Quiet, not accusing. Feeling for the shape of it. Amelia set down her coffee. That's a serious thing to say, I know. Do you have something specific? Not yet, he said. The word yet sat between them in the morning air. I'll let Marco know you're concerned, she said. Perfectly level. Aldo nodded. Left. She had 48 hours, maybe 72, before he came back with something more than instinct. That night, her transmission was longer than usual. She laid it out cleanly. The conversation, the timeline, the risk, DeLuca's response came 90 minutes later, also longer than usual. Don't move. Don't change your patterns. I'm handling it. She stared at those words for a long time. She wanted to ask what handling meant, what it would cost Aldo, who was family, who was in over his head, but wasn't a monster. She didn't ask. 4 days later, Aldo was transferred to a Moretti operation in the south. Alive, unharmed, simply moved. Like a piece on a board. She understood then that DeLuca was not just protecting the operation. He was protecting her. She didn't know what to do with that. I need you to stay with me right here, because what happens next is the moment this story stops being about revenge. And once you hear it, I think you'll understand why some of you are going to sit quietly for a minute after this video ends. Week 5. Marco came home from a meeting that should have run past midnight. Came home at 9. Distracted in a way she'd never seen. Not the cold distraction of business, but something rattled underneath. He poured whiskey standing up, drank it in 2 swallows. Then he turned to her. Someone's been watching the Del Mar warehouse, he said, not casual, testing the air. She kept her face exactly where it was. Anyone you recognize? Not yet, he looked at her. And then, the knife wrapped in silk, he said. You'd tell me if you heard anything, wouldn't you, Em? Her nickname, softened on purpose. A reminder of what he could be when he chose to be. Of course, she said. He nodded, went upstairs. She sat in that chair until midnight, alone in the quiet of the house. And for the first time since this began, she let herself feel what she had been organizing into strategy. The grief of the courthouse. The 8 months of learning how to be invisible. The precise moment she'd understood that the debt her father couldn't pay had never been accidental, that she had been moved into this house by a design she hadn't known existed. She thought about DeLuca, saying, I have thought about that meeting every day for 7 years. She thought about a woman named Sophia, who never got to find out what was done to her. She thought about what it meant that she and DeLuca were fighting to finish something neither of them had chosen to start. The revelation came on a Tuesday. He requested an in-person meeting. Different location, higher security. She arranged for Marco to be at a function and slipped out. DeLuca was already at the table when she arrived, and the documents spread in front of him were not about Marco's supply routes. They were about her, a property in the south of France, a shell company she'd never heard of, registered 15 years ago. Her name, her mother's name, a photograph she recognized immediately. Herself at 17, standing outside a restaurant she hadn't thought about in years. And beside her in the photograph, a man, not her father, someone she had met 3 times as a teenager, someone she'd been told was a family friend, someone she had never once connected to the world she had been so careful to stay adjacent to. She stared at the photograph. Who is he? She asked. Though something cold was already unfolding in her chest. DeLuca slid a second document across the table. A financial record. Dates going back 30 years. The same company name appearing beside the Caruso family name, and beside a property transfer, and beside a loan authorization that had become a debt that had become a marriage. She pieced it together herself. DeLuca watched her do it and said nothing, because he understood that some things need to be found, not handed over. He built it, she said finally. My father's debt. He engineered the conditions. Made Marco necessary. She looked up. Why? Because Marco was his piece, DeLuca said. And you were the resource that made Marco liquid enough to fight me. And I was the problem he needed both of you to wear down. He paused. His name is Gennaro Ricci. He has been watching Marco and me destroy each other for years, from a position that neither of us ever had reason to look at, because we were looking at each other, she said. Yes, the room was very, very quiet. She had come here to burn Marco Moretti's empire. But Marco wasn't the architect of anything. He was a piece on the same board she was, and the man who'd been moving them both, who had taken Sophia, who had taken her freedom, who had constructed an entire decade of other people's suffering for his own positioning, had never once appeared in any of the accounts she'd read, because the accounts she'd been given to read were the ones he'd chosen to show her. She stood up from the table, walked to the window, stood there with her back to DeLuca and her hands completely still at her sides. He let her. After a while, she heard him rise, heard him come to stand near her, not behind her, not crowding, just within reach. He put the full file on the ledge in front of her. Didn't say, "Here's what we do next." Didn't say, "Now you understand." Just placed the documents in her sight line and stepped back. "These are yours," the gesture said. "You decide what to do with them." She understood in that moment that she was not in the room with the man who was using her. She was in the room with a man who knew what it felt like to have your entire life turned out to have been someone else's design, and who had decided, quietly, that he was done being the only one in the room who knew it. She turned around. "Tell me everything you have on Ricci," she said, "and then get out of my way." They had 43 days before Ricci's network noticed the shape of what was coming. 43 days in which Amelia did what she had always been built to do. She read the structure of hidden things and found where the weight was resting and removed it from the foundation, precisely, without drama. Ricci had been meticulous for 30 years, but meticulousness assumes no one is looking. It assumes the person managing your layered accounts is the person you put there. It assumes the woman in the enemy household is the weapon you aimed, not the engineer who redesigned the whole machine while you weren't watching. Amelia rebuilt the financial architecture of everything Ricci had buried, turned it into documentation that would survive any court in any jurisdiction, and handed it to people who had been waiting for exactly this for a very long time. Marco, when presented with what Ricci had actually used him for, when he understood that Sofia DeLuca's death had been Ricci's operation, not a favor done on his behalf, but a move made through him, using his network, his resources, his name, Marco went very quiet. Then he got on a plane. She let him. She had promised herself in the early days that his ruin would have her fingerprints on it. But there was a specific kind of exhaustion that came from carrying a grudge as a primary load-bearing wall, and Amelia was an architect. She knew what happened to structures built around something hollow. She let him go. Ricci's fall was quieter and more complete than anything Marco could have produced. It didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. The map simply changed. Amelia was in DeLuca's apartment the night the last piece moved into place. Not waiting for news, she already knew. She was sitting at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil, doing what she always did when she needed to think. She was drawing, not plans, not technical documents, just shapes. The rough outlines of a building she'd been thinking about for a long time. Something small. Something with good light, something designed for a person who wanted to be found only by the people she chose. DeLuca came to look over her shoulder. He didn't ask what it was. He could see what it was. "You could build that," he said. "I know," she said. She kept drawing. He got 2 glasses of something amber and put one beside her hand without interrupting the pencil. She didn't look up, but her hand steadied. She had walked into this as a woman who had been reduced, quietly and systematically, to a function in someone else's plan. She walked out as the one who had drawn the plan that ended it. And the man who stood in the kitchen of that quiet apartment, who had lost everything once and rebuilt himself into something formidable and cold and still faintly, stubbornly alive underneath it all, he wasn't a monster. He was someone who had been surviving in a cage he hadn't built, the same as her. The difference now was that neither of them was inside it anymore. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is refuse to be what someone else designed you to be. Remember that line. You're going to need it. But here is what I haven't told you. The night Ricci's network collapsed, 3 phones rang that shouldn't have. 3 people who had never appeared in any of Amelia's documents. Never appeared in DeLuca's intelligence. 3 people who had been so carefully positioned above the entire operation that even Ricci hadn't known they were there. He was the puppet master. And he had puppet masters, too. The car outside Amelia's new building 2 weeks later wasn't a coincidence. DeLuca saw it on his own surveillance before she ever knew to look. He didn't tell her immediately. He spent 48 hours making a decision. And whatever he decided, it is going to cost them both something that this chapter only hinted at. Part 2 is coming to Boundless Sage Stories. And if this chapter was a careful, quiet build, the next one is where it ignites.